the servants. From the beginning, servants played important parts in the everyday existence. By force of circumstances, some of them became unique witnesses in confidence and showed themselves to be loyal friends, the only friends. Who were they, and whence did they come? Out of the numerous personnel which the Grand Marshal had brought from Malmaison, the English allowed only a dozen domestic servants to embark. Marchand, chief valet to His Majesty, Saint Denis, and Novaras, his footman, Cipriani, Franceschi, who performed the duties of steward, Pierron, butler, Rousseau, whitesmith, Lepage, cook, the two Archambaults, who, retiring from the stables, were taken as postilions, like Gentilini from Elba. We now come to the Corsican Santini, who during the 100 Days was a cabinet usher to domestic servants, Bernard and his wife, to Sir General Bertrand, his wife, and their children, a waiting maid, Josephine Brule, for Madame de Montsalon. And that was all. Nicholas Chillis, who served the emperor for a long time as valet, had to return, and also did Toutain, a steward, a secretary, an office boy, 7 footmen, 2 keepers of the wardrobe, a messenger, a wheelwright, besides the grand marshals, 2 secretaries, and 8 domestic servants of the Bertrands, the Montsalons, and Gourgaud. Gourgaud managed to embark his valet, but he was sent back upon arrival at St. Helena. Of those servants, not one of them is without interest, but one above all deserves particular attention, a romantic figure from whom one could expect explicit information because his very profession demanded that he should shun attention and eschew curiosity. But from what one saw of his life, he played a more important part than he was given credit for. He was Cipriani Franceschi, Republican by conviction and opinions. He had been most attached to the emperor since his misfortune. In fact, perhaps this Corsican had always known Napoleon and was one of the patriots who took refuge on the continent in 1793. It was said that he had served on one of the Corsican battalions. That is possible, although neither his name nor his particulars have been found, but it was seldom from the military that Salicetti recruited his men, and Franceschi was always very much put in the confidence of this interesting, mysterious, and little-known person. Cipriani seemed to have been employed in 1808, bribing the Corsicans in English pay, who constituted with a Maltese battalion the garrison of the Isle of Capri, but this plot did not prejudice the scaling of the rock. It is said that in 1814, having rejoined the emperor at Elba, he was commissioned to go to Vienna to elicit information there, and that he was the one who notified the emperor of the design of the allies that had formed for transporting him to an island in the African waters. Cipriani does not figure in the registers of the imperial household prior to the 100 Days, when he was a qualified steward. As such, his duties must have been interrupted, but that was not his chief employment at St. Helena. He was entrusted to make inquiries, to elicit news, and he alone, or practically so, discharged the duty of providing information. The emperor had complete confidence in him, and he showed it in a manner which aroused the jealousy of certain of his companions. He would give us all up to keep Cipriani, said Gourgaud. This Corsican no doubt had an ancient connection with the Bonapartes, one of those family associations in the Roman fashion, in which the servant finds himself always admitted to the house, as well as his wife and children. Cipriani's wife, Adelaide Charmont, was at Rome with her children, her son with Cardinal Fesch, her daughter with Madame Mère. Their prosperity was quite remarkable, and they were far from being deprived of means, Cipriani having considerable investments in Genoa. Next to him, of an inferior rank, was another Corsican, a Giovanni Natali Santini, 25 or 26 years of age, a Corsican rifleman in 1812, since when he had been employed as express messenger to General Headquarters. In 1814, he had voluntarily accompanied the emperor to Elba, where, to keep him occupied, he had been appointed keeper of the portfolio and usher. Now it was known only too well what ought to be done with him, but Napoleon never gave it a thought to supersede him by someone else who could make himself useful. He was a Corsican. The emperor's personal service was assured by his chief valet, Louis Marchand, who, quite young, had given proof of his sagacity, his loyalty, and his tact. He was enrolled into the imperial service in 1811 when 19 years old, in a batch of youthful servants recruited from the middle classes, having received a certain amount of education and furnished solemn moral guarantees. His mother was nurse to the King of Rome and showed herself absolutely devoted. That year, 1811, Marchand accompanied the emperor on the journey to Holland. In 1812, Madame de Montesquieu, governess to the children of France, had begged the emperor to exempt him from military service. Napoleon refused, but from his privy purse he paid a substitute. However, he did not know this humble supernumerary who had accompanied him on the Dresden journey and then returned to Paris. Marchand was at Fontainebleau. At the time of the abdication, Constant, the chief valet, and Rustam, the Mameluke, had fled in face of the master's misfortune. The emperor seemed little accustomed to the other valets. Perhaps he had reasons for not desiring them, although certain of them were loyal and devoted, while several of them were well educated. They were chiefly scattered among the services sent on different errands, and had been unable to rejoin him. Marchand was chosen by the Grand Marshal to replace Constant, and while his mother was in attendance on the King of Rome in Vienna, he accompanied the emperor to Elba. His attention gave satisfaction on account of the diligence, the ability, and tact he displayed. The emperor took him into his confidence and never regretted it. As at Paris, so at Porto-Ferrajo, Marchand was not intoxicated during the 100 days by his sudden prosperity. Huge wages, 8,000 francs and 1,500 francs worth of clothes, a liberal table, a carriage, admission to the imperial theaters, and he was as attentive, devoted, and respectful at Rochefort and on the Bellerophon as in the Tuileries and at the Elysee. He was a man of wonderful health and incredible resistance. He was above all a man of courage. This is well borne out in his memoirs. After Marchand, the man who approached the emperor most closely and often was Louis Etienne Saint-Denis, footman, or if you prefer it, Mameluke, the son of the riding master at the royal stables. He was born at Versailles in 1788, and after reasonably comprehensive studies and a course as junior clerk in the attorney's chambers, he was engaged in 1806 in the household as undergroom. He campaigned in Spain and Germany and took part in the Holland affair in 1811. At the end of that year, Napoleon wanted a second Mameluke. Saint-Denis was chosen, assumed Oriental attire, and was christened Ali. He served under Rustam, who, on account of his violence, could not be kept in the apartments, and whom the emperor had relegated to Fontainebleau. Henceforth, Saint-Denis discharged in one of the services the same duties as did Rustam and another. As valet and footman, he took part in the campaign bearing the emperor's spyglass and a silver flask of brandy. Thus he served in the Russian and Saxony campaigns. But being included in the service left at Mainz, he rejoined his master in Elba, where he was his only Mameluke, returned at the emperor to Paris, and never left him during the Belgian campaign. He was a man who, with a good primary education, had a taste for books. Like Marchand, wrote a neat hand, which was improved and reduced in size during the captivity by writing an infinite number of letters legibly on the smallest pieces of satin or paper. By his loyalty, his zeal, his honesty, his tact, he was the equal of Marchand, whose friend he became. But Saint-Denis, older than his companion, had not, it seems, the same ability nor the same resistance, and only particular circumstances precluded his enjoying the same prosperity. When it must be hoped will be the case, the souvenirs of Saint-Denis are published, the mutual attractions of the two men will be better understood. Pierron, who was the real steward, Cipriani forming the duties rather of controller, as they are called in a princely house, ought to have been butler, for that was his sphere. He had been taken on as under butler in 1807 and had gone on to Holland before accompanying the emperor on the 1813 and 1814 campaigns. Finally, he was one of the 6 butlers at a salary of £450 at Fontainebleau. He begged to leave for Elba but in the stead of one of his superiors who had deserted, and he went as butler. He retained the post upon the return to Paris, saw the campaign through the emperor, and never left him. The high table of these folks at St. Helena consisted of Cipriani, Pierrot, Marchand, and Saint Denis. They constituted the domestic hierarchy. At the servants' table there sat with Santini, a footman named Novaraz, a native of the Vaud district. He was admitted into the household in 1809, and in 1813 he was the last of the 7 footmen enrolled from the service of the chief equerry and reached a salary of 960 francs as a footman. He was present during the campaigns of 1813 and 1814 on the backs of the imperial carriage. He was promoted to valet with a 2-cornered cocked hat and attired in the traditional uniform, which, as is known, permitted its wearer to carry arms. During the journey from Fontainebleau to Fréjus, Novaraz was on the box of the emperor's carriage. At Orgon, a man hurled himself like a madman at it in an attempt to open the door. Novaraz drew his sword with one hand and holding a blunderbuss in the other, without hindrance from the crowds, threatened the first man who dared to approach the carriage. The Grand Marshal immediately lowered the window and cried to him to keep calm. Nevertheless, having gained a little time, the horses were changed and a further start was made. Novaraz was a man whose loyalty could be relied upon, but he was a little out of his depth when immediately associated with the emperor. Of the 2 archimbaults who went to form the personnel of the stables, one, Achille Thomas Lyon, was enlisted in the service of the chief groom in 1805. In 1814, he absolutely sought to accompany the emperor to Elba and was in charge of the footmen there. Upon the return to Paris on March 20th, he retained his post and fulfilled it on the Belgian campaign. His brother, Joseph Olivier, had, like himself, graduated as footman through the stables. Both were coachmen of incredible dexterity, so necessary at St. Helena, driving quickly according as the emperor ordered, as well as forming hand and on postilions. As to loyalty, these 2 men were among the one most praised, since their characters surpassed the credit they received. In the household, Rousseau had been a whitesmith. At the moment, he was intended as keeper of the plate, which would be no sinecure considering the quantities taken, because at the time of the departure, Coulon, controller of the household, had amassed a dozen sets like the one the government commission had ordered. He had added all the plate from Tuileries so that there was a triple or quadruple service with the number of large pieces and a complete dessert service in silver gilt. Gentilini, who had gone to Paris from Elba as footman, was still a footman at St. Helena. All these servants had at least done service in the Tuileries. Lepage, the cook, on the contrary, came from the household of King Joseph at Rochefort. Ferdinand Rousseau, chef at Elba, and then at the Tuileries during the 100 days, began wrangling and finally refused to go, saying that he had not been paid what he was promised for going to Elba. Consequently, great inconvenience was caused. Joseph offered his cook, Michel Lepage, a waiter from Montfontaine, who had accompanied him and was going with him to America. Lepage, as a favor, agreed to accompany the emperor, but he was a poor hand at his trade, a bit of an artful dodger, of difficult temperament, and questionable loyalty. He had to be sent back in 1818. There were certain changes in this staff. Cipriani died on St. Helena. Archambault Jr., Rousseau, Santini were nominatively forced by the English to leave their master. Gentilini, taken sick, was sent back home. To take the places of Cipriani and Lepage, the imperial family sent the butler Jacques Courceau and the cook Jacques Chandelier. Courceau came from Adamare, one of whose valets he was. Chandelier, born at Milan in 1798, was engaged in 1813 as cook apprentice in the household, and after 1815 served Princess Pauline. He enjoyed poor health, but was sincerely devoted. These 2 men were of the same class as the other servants and did not discredit them. Further, General Bertrand had as a valet a certain Bernard Hayman, a native of Ghent, whose wife was waiting maid to the Countess. They had with them their son of 15, Bernard, who used to get drunk and then pick a quarrel with his companions, was discharged by the general and sent back to Europe during 1819, he was replaced by Etienne Bouge, the son of a farmer, in a small way, who had offered to rejoin his master, showed himself loyal and intelligent, and whose souvenirs made entertaining reading. Bernard's wife was replaced by the wife of one of the soldiers of the garrison, but for her children, Madame Bertrand requested Lady Jerningham, her aunt, to select a governess whose admission to St. Helena she should effect. Lady Jerningham sent her young girl, Betsy Hall, whose beauty made a great impression on the prisoners at Longwood, so much so that said that he married her. As it was, any girl would have found a husband among these delightful bachelors. And Josephine Shooter, Madame de Montsalon's waiting maid, married Novarez with little opposition from the emperor, who did not regard this marriage to be to the advantage of a man whom he wished well. In this climate and latitude, a kind of avarice madness possessed the people. Nurse, waiting maid, kitchen maid, Creole or Negroes, it made no difference. It was a woman, and it gave rise to competition round the sick for these domestic Helens. Such was the complete retinue. Among the personages in the foreground were differences of birth, education, and means, and they seemed powerless to institute friendly relations among themselves and incapable of endeavoring to conceal their animosities, even to please the master. Just as their rivalries, their ambitions, and especially their greed necessarily promoted ill feeling, so, on the contrary, the supernumeraries, domestic servants of all capacities emanating from similar families, having received a like education, trained in the same discipline, found themselves quite steady amidst varieties of temperament, refinement, and manners, united by the loyalty they bore the emperor and the honor they dedicated to him. They were sensible of the continual evidence on his part of a goodness which, amidst the worst sufferings, never varied, reappearing after crisis, which sometimes caused him momentary anger, showing itself by a word, a smile, a look, and penetrating these simple hearts with a sacredness to which their families remain, even to the present day, unobtrusively faithful. The prison, the jailer, the dramatis personae at Auxonne. In 1788, Lieutenant Buonaparte, studying elementary geography from the Abbé de la Croix's book, wrote in an exercise book the chief ideas he wished to remember. When he reached British possession in America, Asia, and Africa, he wrote, Africa, keep course in Guinea. A fairly strong castle. On one side is Fort Royal, protected by 16 pieces of cannon. St. Helena, a little island. And after writing St. Helena, a little island, as if fate stopped his hand, he wrote no more and left the rest of the page blank. There are some mysteries of human foresight which defy all explanation and preclude analysis. A little island, that was all Napoleon knew of St. Helena in 1788. By 1815, the public was scarcely better informed. Nevertheless, that vigil, which the English had kept over the ocean and on which they waged so many wars, had not failed to attract and hold the emperor's attention. From Mainz on September 30th, 1804, he wrote to the Minister of Marine to order 3 expeditions, one to the West Indies, a second to the Dutch colonies of Suriname, a third to St. Helena. Take St. Helena, he wrote, a station and a cruiser there for several months. 1,200 and 1,500 men will be required. Regarding the St. Helena expedition, he added, I have sent you a memorandum to Bologna. Fetch the writer of this memorandum. Who is it, Jivet? The English are in no wise expecting this expedition. It will be a simple matter to surprise them. He further said, the man who is a Jivet will remain with you until the last moment, when he will leave post haste for Paris, return to Toulon, and embark immediately upon the admiral's vessel bound for St. Helena. The expedition, which consisted of 2 vessels, 4 frigates, and 2 brigs, carried 2,100 men under the command of Brigadier General Rye. Everyone was on board when the emperor gave up the St. Helena plan to reinforce the Suriname expedition, which Larveston commanded and to whom Rye gave his support. It set sail, but just off Toulon, the squadron ran into a gale, was obliged to return. This was the beginning of the weakness and the procrastination of Admiral Villeneuve's Suriname, as well as St. Helena was now abandoned. Further, they had only the information of the man from Givet, who was an Englishman. For at Givet, numerous Englishmen were interned and had been arrested at the violation of the Peace of Amiens.